No one knows where or how triffids, predatory mobile plants, appeared on Earth. One day they killed Bill Mason's mother, who had been studying them. She had tried to understand them, and now Bill is doing the same, working at a special farm dedicated to breeding triffids, from which people have learned to extract valuable oil that replace fossil fuels. Triffids could feed on decaying meat and had a sting capable of striking prey with poisonous sap from a distance. Therefore, safety measures were applied when breeding triffids. Their stings were trimmed, and farm workers used protective masks. During experiments, Bill and his partner Lucy noted that triffids had acute hearing and presumably intelligence, which sparked protests from a part of society that believed exploiting Mother Nature was unacceptable. One day, a van arrives at the triffid breeding company, driven by an activist intending to release the triffids from the facility if possible. Security quickly spots him. Bill and Lucy also head to the nursery, where Lucy is caught by the fanatic. Bill persuades the man to let her go and notices that she is left without protective glasses. He offers his own and asks to ensure Lucy's safety. The activist allows her to put them on, not noticing that the triffids are starting to react to the people nearby. Bill tries to protect Lucy and gets his eyes burned by the poisonous sap of a triffid. At that moment, security apprehends the activist and Lucy rushes Bill to a clinic in London. That same day, a famous journalist, Joe Clayton, is interviewing one of the astrophysicists who promises an unprecedented spectacle for all mankind. Due to a solar storm, the sky will be lit up with all colors, a beautiful and safe sight. Meanwhile, Bill's eyes are bandaged at the clinic, and he is warned that he might lose his vision. In the evening, the sky over the planet begins to glow, attracting millions of people outside to watch the spectacle. However, some remain indifferent or are unable to view the show due to work obligations. Suddenly, the solar light becomes too intense and, at some point, literally strikes people's eyes, taking away their ability to see. The same thing happens to the passengers of a plane headed to London. Around the world, communication breaks down and panic begins. Bill realizes that something terrible has happened, but he cannot understand what exactly, as he is still blindfolded. He gets up and makes his way into the corridor, where he hears screams of terror and despair. Eventually, he finds a mirror, removes the bandage, and sees his own face. Bill is overjoyed that the doctor's predictions were wrong. Meanwhile, on the plane, all pilots and passengers lose their sight, except for one man. He had been sleeping with a mask on his face and a cap pulled down, so the deadly rays did not harm him. Seeing the chaos around him, he gathers life jackets from the others and barricades himself in a restroom. The plane crashes in the center of London, and the sole survivor, Torrance, makes his way out. Meanwhile, Bill leaves his hospital room and encounters one of the elderly patients who begs him for help. However, he feels powerless to assist until he understands what exactly is happening. Wandering through the hospital's corridors, he is horrified by the chaos and panic. One of the doctors tells him that everyone went blind after looking at the sky. Bill steps outside and sees the same old woman. She has apparently fallen from a window and died. Horrified, he runs away. At the same time, Joe regains consciousness inside the wreckage of the radio station, destroyed by the plane crash, and calls for help. Torrance, meanwhile, goes shopping. Joe manages to free herself from the debris and steps out onto the streets, where horror reigns. Blind people, realizing she can see, start gathering around her, begging to be led to safety. Some recognize her voice. More and more people gather, and the situation becomes dangerous. Joe manages to get into a car and drive away. However, she is soon stopped by a policeman who orders her to drive him to a specified location. Joe resists. At that moment, Bill appears. Realizing that something bad is happening, he chases the officer away from Joe and quietly leads her away from the crowd. Meanwhile, Torrance notices a dead police officer and takes his weapon. Bill and Joe introduce themselves, and Bill announces his intention to go to the triffid farm to make sure everything is safe. At the same time, Torrance settles down in a house. Meanwhile, chaos also unfolds at the triffid farm. People have lost their sight, and due to the power outage, there is no more security. The activist hiding in one of the storage rooms turns out to be lucky. He retained his vision. Now he intends to fulfill his long-held plan and release the triffids. Morning comes. Joe is outraged that there is no communication and no way to find out what is happening in the world. Then they see a crowd of people being held back by police officers who themselves can no longer see. Joe convinces one of the officers that she can see and could be useful. However, a high-ranking military officer orders to open fire. Shots ring out and people scatter in panic. All this time, from the window of a nearby house, the sound of a violin can be heard. A blind violinist playing his final piece. Bill pulls Joe out of the crowd and they move away from the chaos, but then their attention is drawn to the violinist, who, standing on a balcony, climbs over the railing and falls down. This deeply shocks Joe, and she asks Bill to take her with him. They find a working car and drive away from the city center. Soon they reach the triffid farm, and to their horror, they see numerous mutilated remains left by the plants. Bill explains that this was where the male triffid plants were cultivated, whose purpose was to fertilize the female specimens. And the males are extremely aggressive. While searching the greenhouse, they find the body of the activist, the first victim of the triffids he himself released. Then Bill finds Lucy's body and mourns her. Joe blames the scientists for creating such a danger, but Bill reminds her that triffids had actually saved the planet from global warming. He suggests Joe get some rest while he gathers his notes and research results. She asks him to take her to her father's house afterward. Bill promises to do so and goes to his lab, where a photo of his mother and himself as a child stands on the table. He spent his whole life working with triffids, trying to understand them, and recorded all the sounds they made onto a tape recorder. Hearing these sounds, Joe also comes into the lab, but Bill admits he doesn't know exactly what the triffids are saying. He only knows that there were 500 triffid farms in Britain alone and millions worldwide. They reproduce normally, which is why controlling the males was so important. Now, however, they are free. Soon the pair reaches Joe's father's house, but the old man does not respond to her calls. Joe runs toward the forest and sees triffids dragging away her father's dead body. She tries to pull him back and shoots at one of the plants. It backs off for a moment, but Bill sees more moving bushes in the thicket and barely manages to pull the crying Joe away. On the way back, they stop on a bridge from which they can see for miles. Smashed cars and the bodies of the dead scattered along the road. They realize that the days of human civilization are over, and the days of the triffids have begun. Soon, Joe and Bill arrive at the BBC building in London and go on air to warn about the terrible threat posed by the triffids. Bill explains that these carnivorous plants are now free and will hunt people. Their stings are extremely long. Moreover, they make a distinctive ticking, rustling sound, which could help blind survivors detect and avoid them, because the triffids will move into the cities where there is a lot of food, people. After the broadcast, they talk about their childhoods. Bill reveals that it was his father who discovered the mutations in the plants, and that his mother died in Zaire from a triffid's sting. Meanwhile, Torrance, now dressed in an expensive suit, comes to a government building on Downing Street, where he is met by a blind secretary of the Prime Minister. The woman tries to stop him from entering, but Torrance simply pushes past her. In the morning, the woman again asks him to leave, but Torrance is listening to the message about the triffids and instead asks her to make him some breakfast. Meanwhile, Bill and Joe, stepping out onto a balcony, notice a signal from the university tower, a message for sighted people, and hurry toward it. On their way, they spot a car from which Torrance had earlier taken weapons. Torrance invites them to join him as he plans to establish a new government, but Bill refuses. They drive on and soon reach the university, where a crowd of blind people is gathered, led by a sighted man named Coker, who demands that the surviving government employees take control of the situation and help the afflicted. Coker shames the authorities, warning that when the blindness passes, people will remember their inaction. However, the military accept only Joe and Bill, while Coker leads his group away. Inside the building, a woman in charge explains that there are very few sighted people left and ignores Bill's warnings about the triffid threat. She is unaware that the triffids have already escaped from the farms and does not understand the danger. Meanwhile, Coker joins another group of sighted survivors, and later Torrance arrives there as well. Bill realizes that the leadership has no intention of fighting the triffids. Instead, they hope to find a safe place and wait out the apocalypse. They are not planning to help or feed the blind. Their priority is the survival of humanity itself. Joe realizes that the program they propose does not suit her. She catches up with Bill, who is loading a car with supplies to head to his father's house, hoping to find a way to fight the triffids there. Joe intends to go with him, but Bill asks her to stay in safety. As he drives out of the garage, he is captured by Coker's men, who had organized an assault on the university to seize supplies and weapons. Later, the sighted are informed that each of them will be assigned a blind person to care for until vision is restored. Bill is assigned a mechanic who hopes this ordeal will end soon. Meanwhile, Joe recognizes Torrance among the raiders. He confesses that Coker's ideas are closer to his heart. The people are loaded into vehicles and taken to a shelter organized by Coker. Bill approves of the commander's efforts to save everyone, but he dislikes his careless attitude toward the triffid threat. Along the way, the group stops near a bar where the owner tries to shoot at them. However, they inform him that this place will now serve as one of their bases. Torrance delivers Joe an invitation from Coker for a private conversation, having recognized her as a famous journalist and hoping she will address the nation. But Joe, offended by their forceful methods, refuses. Later, the group arrives at a warehouse on the outskirts to pick up more supplies. There, the sighted members notice bloodied scraps of clothing on the floor. At first, they don't realize what this means until they stumble upon triffids. Several people die immediately. The sighted open fire with their pistols, but this only buys them a little time. Soon, only a few survivors remain. Bill yells at Coker, who only now realizes how wrong he was and begs for forgiveness. Joe insists on going immediately to Bill's father's house. The survivors return to the central base at the bar, where Joe agrees to make a broadcast on the radio. Soon, her voice sounds over the airwaves. She warns about the triffids and their threat, while Bill attempts to leave London, dodging Torrance's men, who are rounding up everyone they can find to build their army. One of Torrance's aides announces Bill's arrest and wounds him in the shoulder. Bill regains consciousness, tied up inside a truck. Next to him sits another captive, Coker. It turns out that Torrance had seized power and decided to get rid of both the former commander and the scientist by feeding them to the triffids. Meanwhile, Joe is shown a luxurious room where she is now expected to live. Torrance announces that Bill and Coker died while trying to protect people from a triffid attack. Joe cries. Out in the woods, Coker manages to free himself from his bonds. When the truck stops, he also cuts Bill's ropes. But at that moment, they are ordered at gunpoint to get out. In the next second, a triffid grabs and drags off the guard. Coker fights with the driver as more and more triffids emerge from the forest. One of them grabs Coker, but the wounded Bill manages to grab a weapon and shoot the plant, freeing the major. However, the driver is still alive and armed, forcing the two men to march toward the triffids. As they walk, Bill remembers his tape recorder. He switches it on and throws it behind them at the driver's feet. The sound draws the triffids toward him, while Bill and Coker escape into the woods. However, their car soon breaks down, and they are forced to continue on foot. Meanwhile, Joe continues to address the nation every day, urging survivors to come to London, where there is food and no danger. Bill and Coker eventually reach a new religious colony run by a woman named Mother Durrant. Bill undergoes surgery to remove the bullet and slowly begins to recover. Back in London, Joe learns that the triffids approach the city daily, but so far people have been able to hold them back. Torrance starts to show her personal attention, which Joe dislikes. Bill notices that the colony is surrounded by triffids, but strangely, they are not attacking. One day, a priest, Father Thomas, leaves to search for other survivors. Mother Durrant explains that it is prayer that keeps the triffids at bay, something Bill does not believe. He plans to leave for his father's house, convinced that the triffids have paused because of the cold weather, but will attack once spring comes. He is given a map with a marked route through the forest and sets out. Meanwhile, in London, Joe tries to question a young soldier named Troy about how Bill and Coker died. He tells her that nothing was found at the scene except Bill's tape recorder, and this gives Joe hope that Bill is still alive. Meanwhile, Bill continues through the forest but stumbles and falls, discovering the body of Father Thomas chained to a tree. He realizes that Durrant had sacrificed the old man to the triffids to earn peace for the colony. At the same time in London, Joe steals Bill's tape recorder from Torrance and heads to another broadcast. Bill returns to the community, furious, and accuses Durrant. She defends her actions by claiming she had the higher purpose of protecting the people. But seeing the condemnation in the eyes of the others, Mother Durrant leaves the colony, insisting that without her, it will collapse. Coker stays behind at the monastery while Bill sets off to find his father. That evening, Joe agrees to have dinner with Torrance, but during her next broadcast, she suddenly urges the people not to believe her previous words, claiming the new government only serves its own pleasures, not the people. She warns that there are plenty of triffids in London, despite earlier assurances of safety. An enraged Torrance orders her arrest. However, it turns out that the broadcast was pre-recorded, and Joe is no longer in the studio. Torrance's men rush to find her, but when Troy spots Joe, he deliberately misleads his companions and secretly leaves her a flashlight. Joe manages to escape beyond the fence and disappears into the night. However, she soon falls into a triffid trap. She narrowly escapes through a nearby truck. Spotting an abandoned vehicle, she tries to get inside but finds no keys. She breaks the window of a nearby diner and, hiding from the plants, discovers the keys clutched in the hand of the diner's deceased owner. At the last moment, Joe manages to drive away from the pursuing triffids, but in the forest, she crashes and is forced to continue on foot. Meanwhile, Bill meets two orphaned but sighted girls, Imogen and Susan, who almost attack him at first. Realizing he can help them survive, they offer him the car belonging to their dead parents, and they set out together. That night, Joe encounters a stranger in a car who captures her. By morning, Bill and the girls reach their destination, only to be ambushed by the same mysterious man who turns out to be Bill's father, Dennis. The man proudly shows off his house, protected from triffid attacks by a powerful electric fence, and invites them inside. There, Bill reunites with Joe, whom Dennis had found in the forest the previous day. She returns Bill's recordings and recounts everything that happened in London. That evening, Dennis tells his son about his work and reveals his plan to stop the triffids. He has genetically engineered a new sterile species that could neutralize the old one. He has grown a female specimen and keeps it inside the house. Although Bill finds the idea absurd, he agrees to help with the final stage of the experiment, obtaining the head of a male triffid. Bill takes his tape recorder, says goodbye to Joe, and heads out with a weapon to an abandoned triffid plantation. He sets a trap by playing recorded triffid sounds and discovers that Susan had snuck into his car to help him. As she tries to convince him that she can take care of herself, a triffid grabs her. Bill manages to drive it away with a torch and successfully obtains the head needed for Dennis's experiment. Explaining how he accomplished it, Bill mentions the plant's reactions to the sounds of other triffids. Dennis recalls that Bill's mother also believed triffids communicated among themselves. He gives Bill his mother's old tape recorder. That evening, the triffids begin their pollination season, and it is extremely intense. Meanwhile, Torrance finds a book with Dennis's address and realizes where to look for Bill and Joe. The next morning, Bill and the others notice a plane overhead, dropping leaflets inviting survivors to join a colony on the Isle of Wight. During the day, Dennis visits the captured female triffid. After feeding it, he plays Bill's recordings. Unexpectedly, the plant reacts violently and attacks him. Bill shoots the triffid through its head to free his father, but Dennis dies. With the experimental specimen destroyed, the group has no choice but to head to the Isle of Wight. However, during the night, Torrance's men break into the house. Torrance demands that Bill work for him to find a way to destroy the triffids, promising him fame as the savior of the nation. But Bill refuses to reveal his plans. Torrance threatens to kill the whole group if Bill doesn't come up with a way to destroy the plants by the following morning. After ordering his men to guard the prisoners, Torrance finds the control panel for the electric fence and shows it to Troy. Meanwhile, Bill plans an escape, hoping to use the same recordings that killed his father to attract more triffids and, during the chaos, flee. While Torrance mocks Bill, taunting him about his parents, Susan climbs out of a window and hides the tape recorder outside the house. At night, the sounds of triffid voices spread through the area, and one of the soldiers discovers the device. Upon realizing the massive number of triffids surrounding the house, Torrance orders Troy to shoot the girls and, on his command, to activate the electric fence. However, Troy switches sides and fakes his own death. Torrance, realizing the electricity won't be turned on, runs back into the house while his men are killed by the triffids' branches. He shoots Troy but is soon knocked out by Bill with a stun gun, while the inactive fence collapses under the swarm of triffids, trapping everyone inside the house and yard. Joe realizes they won't be able to escape, but then Susan finds among Bill's belongings an old African mask, which reminds him of something that happened 30 years ago. Back then, an old shaman had asked him to drip triffid poison into his eyes through the mask's slits. Bill finds a severed triffid sting and drops the liquid into his friend's eyes. The substance doesn't blind them, but makes the triffids perceive them as one of their own. The group calmly steps out into the yard and walks through the mass of triffids, who touch them with their stings but do not attack, believing them to be fellow triffids. However, Torrance emerges from the house and opens fire on the plants, enraging them. The triffids seize and entangle him with their roots and branches, while Bill, Joe, Susan, Imogen, and Troy make their escape. The group eventually reaches the Isle of Wight, which is protected from triffids by the surrounding waters. Yet even while living in relative safety, Bill increasingly questions the idea of ever returning to the mainland and reflects on the unsettling morality of a world that had been blind, even when people's eyes were wide open. The film is based on the 1951 novel of the same name by John Wyndham and marks the third adaptation. Although the core idea has been realized in many other projects, it serves as a reminder of humanity's ultimate question: how will people behave if the apocalypse comes? And if it does, what will they become?